Would you rather give up your smartphone or give up sex?
I mean, when you actually look at the raw data behind that question, the cultural implications they're genuinely staggering.
Right. Like, I read that line in our source material and immediately thought, well, sure, maybe a tiny fraction of, incredibly tech-obsessed people might hesitate.
Yeah, you'd think it's a fringe thing.
Exactly. But the research paints a completely different picture. Fully one-third of Americans say they would rather give up sex than lose their cell phones.
Wow.
1 in 3. And when you pull back the lens to look at the broader behavioral patterns, the intensity of our attachment becomes even more apparent. Like 79% of smartphone owners check their device within 15 minutes of waking up.
Every single morning.
Every morning, before they've even fully transitioned out of REM sleep, their hand is already searching the nightstand.
Well, and we can trace this to the frequency of the behavior throughout the whole day. Older studies used to throw around numbers like 34 checks a day. But industry insiders, the people tracking actual session data, they know the real number is closer to an astounding 150 daily sessions.
150 times a day.
Yeah, 150 times. You are reaching into your pocket, pulling out a piece of glass, and interacting with a digital interface. It's a behavioral loop running on an almost continuous cycle.
So we basically have to face the reality that we are completely hooked. I mean, these technologies have transcended mere utility, right?
Oh, absolutely. They're compulsions now.
Yeah, they've turned into ingrained compulsions. It's like that phantom buzz in your pocket, or the impulse to check a notification.
Or that undeniable pull to visit a social feed for just a second, and then,
Then you find yourself still swiping and scrolling an hour later. You feel this urge all day long, yet it's become so ubiquitous that you hardly even notice the mechanism at work.
right, it's just background noise.
Exactly. So establishing that core tension for you listening to this deep dive, we are undeniably hooked. But how exactly are these glowing rectangles seemingly bypassing our rational brains and controlling our actions?
Well, unpacking that exact mechanism is our mission for this deep dive.
Let's get into it.
Yeah, we are looking closely at the foundational introduction in the first chapter of Nir Eyal's groundbreaking research on habit-forming products.
Hmm.
And for anyone listening who is building a business, designing software, or, frankly, just trying to understand their own cognitive blind spots.
Which is all of us, really.
Right. Recognizing how user behavior is engineered is no longer just a neat design trick. It is an absolute imperative for your survival in a world characterized by infinite weaponized distractions.
I love how you phrase that. And I've been thinking about how this fundamentally shifts our understanding of modern commerce.
How so?
Well, because the first massive conceptual hurdle we have to clear here is recognizing the death of the Mad Men era.
Oh yeah, the Don Draper days.
Exactly. The traditional 20th century playbook for creating consumer desire it's completely obsolete now.
It is. I mean, the cultural memory of advertising is still heavily romanticized, though. We picture Madison Avenue in its golden era, right?
Tailored suits, big budget brainwashing.
Exactly. Massive billboard campaigns and sweeping television spots designed to just manufacture consumer desire out of thin air. The strategy back then was pure brute force.
Just spend enough money on reach and frequency, and you
Right.
force your product into the consumer's consciousness.
Right. But in today's multi-screen environment, consumers are hyper-wary of ads.
Oh, completely. We have ad blockers, we skip commercials. I mean, we suffer from banner blindness.
Yeah, that kind of expensive top-down brainwashing is financially ruinous for pretty much everyone. Well, except maybe the absolute biggest legacy brands with bottomless marketing budgets.
Right. If you are a modern enterprise, simply acquiring millions of users through paid channels isn't enough to sustain a business anymore.
Not at all. Economic value today is directly, inextricably tied to the strength of the habits a company manages to create within its user base.
So what does that actually look like in practice?
Well, the transition we're observing is the shift from external prompting to internal prompting. A habit is fully established when a user experiences a subconscious reaction to a highly subtle emotional cue.
And this happens entirely independent of any marketing message, right?
Exactly. Picture a modern user sitting at a desk. They experience a micro moment of boredom, just a slight, almost imperceptible dip in cognitive stimulation.
Like a lull in an email thread.
Right. And instantly, automatically, their thumb opens an app, or they feel a brief, fleeting pang of loneliness. And before the prefrontal cortex even registers the emotion, they're scrolling through a social feed.
Or when a question pops into their head, before they even attempt to retrieve the answer from their own memory, they're already querying a search engine.
Yes. So the competitive landscape completely changes. It's no longer about who has the loudest billboard.
The first to mind solution wins the entire market.
Exactly. The company that successfully solders its product to those internal emotional triggers effectively monopolizes that specific user state.
Okay, but I do want to push back on this just a little bit. I want to challenge the absolute death of advertising
Sure, go ahead.
because I still see billions of dollars poured into performance marketing, SEO, paid acquisition. I mean, app developers are spending massive amounts of capital just to get people to download their software.
That's a fair point, but the distinction lies between acquiring a user and retaining them.
Okay, tell me more.
Expensive marketing, paid ads, SEO optimization, those function as external triggers. They're highly effective at acquiring a user for an initial session, but they're entirely incapable of keeping them long-term.
Ah, so it's a leaky bucket problem.
Exactly. Relying on paid channels to constantly re-engage your existing user base is mathematically unsustainable. Customer acquisition costs will eventually just outpace the lifetime value.
Right, because the architects behind habit-forming products, they don't want to pay to get you back.
No, never. Their architectural goal is to weave their service so deeply into your daily routines and your emotional architecture that you return entirely on your own volition.
Because if a business has to rent my attention every single day, their margins are going to collapse.
Precisely.
So if you're out there building a project or a platform right now, this fundamentally shifts how you design your user journey. The ultimate goal is to become an automatic cognitive reflex.
Yes, you want your service to be the default neurological response to a specific human feeling.
Which forces us to look at the actual blueprint. How does a company actively manufacture that kind of psychological reflex from scratch?
Well, that inquiry leads us directly to the author's background. Back around 2008, Nir Eyal, coming out of Stanford with an MBA, was starting a company and observing the ecosystem of Silicon Valley investors.
Right, this was right around the boom of online social games.
Exactly. He was watching the explosive growth in that sector. He saw companies generating literal billions of dollars in revenue by selling virtual cows on digital farms.
Which is just, the juxtaposition there is striking.
It really is. When you strip away the digital interface and say, selling virtual cows, the underlying behavior seems utterly irrational.
It is deeply irrational. I mean, people were willingly parting with real-world currency for non-existent agricultural assets.
Yeah, and he found himself analyzing these two converging industries, traditional advertising and this new wave of social gaming.
He recognized that both were fundamentally dependent on behavioral manipulation.
Right, so he went looking for the underlying architecture, a unified theory, or like a how-to manual for building habit-forming technologies.
And he found a complete void.
A total void. The enterprises that had successfully cracked the code of behavior design were fiercely guarding their methodologies as proprietary trade secrets.
Like the formula for Coca-Cola.
Exactly. While there was robust academic literature on consumer psychology, behavioral economics, and neuroscience, there was no practical, synthesized framework available for actual builders and innovators.
So he essentially embarked on a multi-year project to fix that, distilling academic research, consulting across startups, Fortune 500 companies, just trying to identify the common behavioral loops shared by the most addictive products.
And the culmination of that synthesis is what he labeled the hook model.
Yes, the hook model. It's a 4-phase cyclical process designed to manufacture and solidify user habits. Let's deconstruct this blueprint by looking at a specific, concrete scenario from the text.
Sure, the Barber and Pinterest example.
Exactly. Let's walk through that.
Okay, so the architecture of the hook model relies on 4 distinct phases: trigger, action, variable reward, and investment.
The 4 pillars.
Right, and the entire cycle relies on a catalyst, which is the trigger. It acts as the actuator behavior, like the initial spark plug that fires the engine of engagement.
We can observe this with Barbara, a young woman in Pennsylvania. She's scrolling through her Facebook newsfeed and happens to see a photo of a rural part of the state posted by a family member.
And she's actually planning a trip there with her brother, Johnny. So this specific photo functions as an external trigger.
Right. It's a piece of information deliberately placed in her environment that contains a clear call to action.
It arrests her attention. But the strategic objective of the hook model is to eventually render that external trigger completely unnecessary.
How so?
Well, over successive cycles through this behavioral loop, Barbara's brain will begin to associate the platform not with a physical link on a screen, but with an internal psychological state.
Like the need to alleviate boredom or the desire for aesthetic inspiration.
Exactly. But in this initial phase, the external trigger serves to prompt the subsequent phase of the cycle.
Which brings us to the action. The trigger provides the cue, but without an action, the loop terminates immediately, right?
Right. The action is defined as the behavior executed in anticipation of a reward.
So for Barbara, the action is the incredibly simple physical movement of clicking or tapping on the interesting photo.
And the friction here must be practically zero. This relies heavily on usability design and principles pioneered by researchers like B.J. Fogg.
Right, the Fogg behavior model.
Exactly. For an action to occur, you need sufficient psychological motivation combined with absolute ease of execution. The more effortless an action is, and the higher the anticipated reward, the higher the probability the user completes it.
And clicking a hyperlink requires infinitesimal physical and cognitive effort.
Barely a twitch of the finger.
So she clicks the photo, the browser redirects, and she lands on Pinterest. This initiates the third phase, the variable reward.
And this is where the psychological engineering becomes profoundly deep.
Yeah, let's dig into this, because this phase capitalizes on the neurobiology of craving, right?
It does. A predictable feedback loop fails to generate long-term desire. Predictability eventually just registers as mundane to the human brain.
I like to visualize this using a refrigerator analogy. Let me try this on you.
Okay, let's hear it.
When you open a standard refrigerator door, the interior light turns on. The outcome is perfectly predictable. It happens exactly the same way every single time. And because there is zero variance, there is zero craving.
Right, you don't stand in your kitchen repeatedly opening and closing the fridge door just to experience the light turning on.
Exactly. But imagine an enchanted refrigerator. Every time you pull the handle, a completely different, unexpected delicacy appears.
Okay, I like where this is going.
The first time, it's a slice of gourmet cake. The next time, it's a perfectly crafted pizza. You would find yourself opening that door obsessively throughout the day.
Oh, definitely. That analogy perfectly isolates the power of variability.
Thank you.
So when Barbara's browser loads Pinterest, she isn't just presented with the single image she initially clicked. The interface cascades with a multitude of diverse, glittering visual stimuli.
She sees images tangentially related to rural Pennsylvania, intermixed with visually arresting content that is entirely unexpected.
Right. It's a calculated juxtaposition of the highly relevant and the seemingly random, the intensely tantalizing and the beautifully mundane.
Let's map that onto the actual neurochemistry, though. What is literally happening in her brain the moment that cascading interface loads?
We are looking at the mechanics of the dopamine system, specifically within regions like the nucleus accumbens.
Okay, dopamine. We hear that word all the time.
We do, and historically we thought dopamine was simply the pleasure chemical. But modern neuroscience reveals it's actually the neurotransmitter of anticipation and motivation.
Anticipation, not just the reward itself.
Exactly. Dopamine levels spike profoundly not when a reward is received, but when the brain is expecting a reward.
Wow.
And introducing variability into the equation massively amplifies this neurochemical surge. This surge places the brain into a highly focused, almost predatory state of seeking.
So it's essentially hunting.
Yes, hunting. And crucially, this neurochemical state actively suppresses the activity in the prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain responsible for higher-order judgment, logic, and impulse control.
While simultaneously hyperactivating the neural pathways associated with wanting and desire.
Right. It's the precise neurobiological mechanism exploited by slot machines and intermittent reinforcement protocols in behavioral psychology.
So Barbara's neurochemistry is effectively hijacked by the promise of potential unpredictable rewards.
Completely hijacked. She enters a state of flow, hunting for the next visually pleasing image, and suddenly 45 minutes have evaporated in a scrolling trance.
She's caught in the compulsion. But the genius of the hook model is that it doesn't end with the reward. There's a final critical phase, isn't there?
Yes. The investment.
The investment phase. How does that work?
Well, the investment phase fundamentally alters the user's relationship with the product. It requires the user to perform a little bit of work.
Work? Like what?
Well, this work isn't designed to provide immediate gratification. Rather, it's about anticipating and enhancing future rewards.
Okay, so Barbara has spent 45 minutes discovering images that delight her. Now she begins to interact with the platform's architecture. She pins specific images to her own curated boards.
She follows other users whose aesthetic matches hers. She is actively inputting data, time, and cognitive effort into this system.
And from a structural standpoint, this investment accomplishes two vital objectives, right?
Yes. First, it triggers the IKEA effect.
Oh, I love this concept.
It's fascinating, right? It's the cognitive bias, where we place disproportionately high value on things we have partially created or invested effort into.
Like a wonky bookshelf you built yourself.
Exactly. Her curated boards are now uniquely hers, increasing her perceived value of the platform.
And what's the second objective?
The second, and more importantly for the behavioral loop, is that her investment actively loads the next trigger.
Oh, wow. Okay.
By choosing to follow another user, she is explicitly authorizing and priming the system to send her a future external trigger.
Like a push notification or an email alerting her that this specific user has posted new content.
Precisely. And this future trigger is designed to pull her right back into the beginning of the hook model.
The cycle just perpetuates itself. Trigger, action, variable reward, investment, round and round, with the friction decreasing and the internal trigger strengthening on every single rotation.
It's an incredibly elegant, self-sustaining architecture.
It really is. But what this actually means for product design is that offering a static utility is insufficient. To construct a habit, you have to engineer a continuous, self-perpetuating loop where the user's own friction and effort actively generate the catalyst for their next visit.
Right. However, I have to say, when we deconstruct the mechanics so clinically like this,
Yeah.
discussing the deliberate suppression of the prefrontal cortex and the exploitation of dopamine surges, it inherently forces a conversation about the ethical parameters of this kind of behavioral engineering.
Yeah, it does start to sound remarkably sinister, doesn't it? I mean, we're essentially discussing the commercialization of compulsion.
We are. And the source material actually acknowledges this tension directly. It notes that we are currently operating with a dangerous trinity.
Ubiquitous, unbroken access via smartphones.
Massive, unregulated data collection allowing for hyper-personalization.
And incredible processing speed.
Right. This convergence makes the digital environment vastly more addictive than anything humanity has previously encountered.
There's a quote in the book. A reader of the author's blog captured this sentiment perfectly. They sent an email with an observation that essentially argued, if a tool cannot be utilized for malevolent purposes, it doesn't qualify as a superpower.
That's such a heavy concept. The underlying premise is that building habit-forming technology is indeed a superpower.
And like any asymmetric capability, if it is wielded without ethical constraints, these meticulously constructed habits can rapidly devolve.
They turn into destructive, mindless addictions that completely erode user agency.
Which brings up a really fascinating cultural observation made in the text. This fear of eroded agency ties into the zombie genre.
Oh, right, the zombie connection.
Yeah. We've seen a massive, almost unprecedented resurgence of zombie media over the last decade or so. Think of vast franchises like Resident Evil, ubiquitous television shows like The Walking Dead, blockbuster films like World War Z.
The popularity of the genre is symptomatic of a broader societal condition. We are collectively experiencing a pervasive, fearful malaise.
It's a deep-rooted anxiety regarding the exponential, seemingly unstoppable progression of technology.
Technology that's becoming increasingly intimate and persuasive. The concept of the zombie serves as a psychological manifestation of our terror at the prospect of being involuntarily controlled.
Right. It's the fear of surrendering our free will to an opaque, algorithmic force that dictates our attention and actions. And it's actually quite deliberate that the text uses the names Barbara and Johnny for the Pinterest example.
I was wondering about that. That's a nod to horror cinema, isn't it?
A brilliant nod. Barbara and her brother Johnny are the iconic protagonists from George A. Romero's seminal film Night of the Living Dead.
Oh, wow. Of course.
Yeah, they're the characters who are ultimately overwhelmed and subsumed by the mindless horde.
That makes perfect sense. Modern consumers share a profound anxiety about becoming the contemporary equivalents of Barbara and Johnny.
Staring vacantly at glowing screens.
Shuffling automatically through our daily lives, while unseen algorithms carefully manage our dopamine receptors.
Well, it's a bleak picture.
It is, yet the analytical perspective offered here is somewhat more optimistic. Acknowledging the fear is valid, but much like the protagonists who survive in those narratives, our defense lies in comprehension.
Knowledge is power.
Exactly. By meticulously understanding the exact mechanics of the contagion, how the hook model operates, how our neurology responds, we gain the capacity to mitigate its control.
I think the practical challenge for creators then is determining how to wield this architecture ethically. Like, how do developers avoid becoming digital drug dealers?
Well, the framework for ethical application is heavily informed by a concept known as choice architecture.
Choice architecture. Okay, tell me about that.
It's a term popularized by behavioral economists Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein. The central thesis is that we can utilize these potent behavioral design methodologies to influence decisions, to nudge users.
But only with the objective of helping them execute choices that they themselves have judged to be beneficial.
Precisely. The goal is to lower the friction for behaviors the user intrinsically desires to perform, but struggles to maintain due to cognitive load or lack of immediate reward.
So this entirely reframes the developer's mandate. Instead of deploying the hook model to maximize endless, hollow social media scrolling that ultimately degrades the user's mental health.
A creator can utilize the exact same neurological levers to engineer an app that hooks a user on daily cardiovascular exercise
Or hooks them on language acquisition.
or aggressive savings and investment strategies. The capability at the disposal of modern entrepreneurs is historically unprecedented.
Right. The imperative is to harness this behavioral superpower to cultivate positive, additive habits that genuinely improve the user's quality of life, rather than optimizing purely for extractive, mindless engagement.
But to execute that effectively, it requires a much more granular understanding of the biological reality of habit formation. We need to transition from the theoretical model into the actual neuroscience explored in the core material.
Ah, yes. The habit zone.
Exactly.
I've been thinking about this from an evolutionary standpoint. Because if the overarching biological goal is to preserve energy, then a habit is essentially the brain's mechanism for being ruthlessly efficient, right?
That is the precise biological imperative. Cognitive psychologists classify habits as automatic behaviors that are reliably triggered by specific situational cues.
So from a purely neurological perspective, this is how the human brain manages the immense computational load of navigating complex environments.
Right. I mean, the brain consumes a massive disproportionate amount of our daily caloric intake.
It's an energy hog.
It really is.
Yeah.
It is constantly seeking avenues to conserve mental energy for critical survival tasks. If you had to consciously, actively deliberate over the micromechanics of every single action you took from the moment you woke up,
How to tie your shoes, how to operate the coffee maker, how to navigate your commute.
your cognitive reserves would be entirely depleted before you even reached your office.
The cognitive load would just be paralyzing.
So it actively writes neurological shortcuts. It offloads these repetitive, successfully executed behavioral sequences into a deeper, evolutionarily older region of the brain.
The basal ganglia.
Yes, the basal ganglia, which governs involuntary actions and motor routines. Once a behavior crosses the threshold into a codified habit, the brain effectively establishes a bypass.
It literally ceases to actively deliberate over the decision-making process.
Exactly. The basal ganglia codifies a sequence that historically provided a satisfactory resolution to a specific cue, and it simply defaults to executing that same sequence whenever the cue is encountered again.
Completely bypassing the prefrontal cortex's analytical oversight.
Exactly.
You know, the text provides a remarkably relatable, almost embarrassing anecdote from the author that perfectly illustrates the rigidity of this neurological autopilot.
Oh, the running story.
Yes. He discusses his established routine of going for a run in the early morning several days a week. Over time, he developed a deeply ingrained behavioral script during these runs.
What was the script?
Whenever he passed a neighbor pulling out their driveway or another runner on the path, he would make eye contact, offer a polite smile, and say, "Good morning."
Okay, so it became a completely conditioned, frictionless response to a specific environmental cue.
Right. The neural pathway linking the cue of eye contact while running to the verbal output of good morning had become heavily myelinated and efficient.
Very efficient. So what happened?
Well, the system breaks down hilariously when the context shifts. One day, a scheduling conflict forces him to abandon his morning run. He reschedules his workout for dusk.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. He heads out as the sun is setting, and shortly into his route, he passes a woman taking out her garbage. The cue occurs. He makes eye contact.
And the basal ganglia fires the established script.
He smiles and confidently blurts out, "Good morning," in the fading evening light. He realizes the absurdity instantly, feels the awkwardness, and corrects himself. But the sheer power of the habit is demonstrated just a few minutes later.
He gets it again?
He passes another jogger, makes eye contact, and despite his previous embarrassment, he blurts out, "Good morning," A second time,
It's amazing.
yeah.
The analytical part of his brain, the part that knows it is evening, was simply too slow to override the automatic execution initiated by the basal ganglia.
The environmental cue overrode the contextual reality completely.
Right.
And the behavioral cascade continues when he finishes the run. He arrives home and steps into the shower, letting his mind wander.
Okay.
Suddenly, he feels a sharp sting on his cheek. He snaps back to full awareness and realizes he has lathered his face and is actively shaving.
Wow. In the evening.
Exactly. His established routine involves shaving during his morning post-run shower. Shaving his face at dusk was completely unnecessary and absurd, but once the larger post-run shower routine was initiated, his brain simply executed every subroutine associated with it.
It is a profound demonstration of the basal ganglia, operating entirely devoid of mindful, conscious awareness.
It immediately makes me think of how we program computer macros.
Macros, like in Excel.
Yeah. For anyone who has worked extensively in Excel or written basic scripts, a macro is a recorded sequence of distinct actions. You assign a single trigger, a specific keystroke combination, and the computer perfectly executes 50 separate commands in a fraction of a second without any further input.
I see. So the basal ganglia is fundamentally recording complex behavioral macros for human survival.
Exactly.
That analogy maps perfectly onto the neurobiology. And from a commercial perspective, successfully embedding a product into one of those human macros is the absolute pinnacle of product design.
Because the strategic objective is to eliminate the deliberation phase entirely.
You want the user to experience the cue, whether it's the internal sensation of anxiety, a push notification, or simply the time of day, and automatically execute the behavioral macro that culminates in opening your application.
So the mandate for builders is clear. You are attempting to write a macro directly into your user's basal ganglia.
That's the goal.
But let's look at how this psychological dominance translates onto a balance sheet. Why does Wall Street place such an astronomical premium on companies that successfully manufacture habits?
Well, the sources meticulously break down 4 distinct, highly quantifiable bottom-line benefits that these businesses enjoy. These 4 competitive advantages are the fundamental drivers of outsized valuations in the tech sector.
Let's go through them. What's the first one?
The first, and perhaps most impactful, is the phenomena of increasing customer lifetime value, commonly referred to as CLTV.
Right. And just to define that, the foundational equation for valuing any enterprise is calculating the sum of its future cash flows.
Exactly. CLTV represents the total aggregate revenue a company can expect to extract from a single customer before that customer eventually churns, whether they switch to a competitor, abandon the product category entirely, or, pass away.
Okay, so how do habits affect CLTV?
When a product successfully establishes a habit, it naturally and dramatically increases both the longevity and the frequency of the user's engagement.
Which drastically inflates their lifetime value.
Yes. Consider the economics of the credit card industry. Credit card consumers notoriously exhibit incredibly high loyalty. Their financial routines and purchasing habits become deeply intertwined with a specific card's interface and reward structure.
And because the financial institutions know that the CLTV of a habitual user is exceptionally high, they are willing to absorb massive upfront customer acquisition costs.
Absolutely. They will offer complimentary airline flights, waived annual fees, or literally hundreds of dollars in direct cash sign-up bonuses just to acquire the user.
Fully confident that the eventual habitual use will generate returns that dwarf that initial investment.
Exactly, which leads directly into the second massive financial advantage, providing pricing flexibility.
Pricing flexibility. This is huge. As daily routines solidify around a specific product, the user's sensitivity to price fluctuations plummets.
There is an incredibly insightful metric detailed here from Warren Buffett, actually, who assesses corporate power through this exact lens.
What does he say?
He notes that you can accurately determine the intrinsic strength of a business by observing the amount of agony the management team experiences when attempting to raise prices.
Oh, that is so good. The agony of raising prices.
Right. Buffett and his longtime partner, Charlie Munger, built their investment philosophy around identifying enterprises where consumers have formed such robust, unshakable routines that they will simply absorb price increases rather than endure the friction of switching.
So they're looking for deeply ingrained habits.
Yes. They frequently cite consumer psychology as the primary driver behind their massive, lucrative investments in brands like See's Candies and Coca-Cola. When a product is a habit, the company possesses immense leverage to increase its profit margins by capturing more consumer surpluses.
And we see this playing out aggressively in the digital space. Like, consider the architecture of free-to-play video games like Candy Crush.
Oh, perfect example.
Right. The initial experience is entirely frictionless and free, allowing the player to develop a consistent daily neurological routine without any financial barrier.
But once that behavioral compulsion is firmly locked in,
Once the macro is written into the basal ganglia,
the developers begin introducing artificial friction that can only be alleviated through microtransactions.
exactly, and converting a deeply habituated user into a paying customer is exponentially easier and cheaper than attempting to monetize a brand new user.
The same principle applies to productivity software too, like Evernote or Notion. The core utility is free, but users willingly pay exorbitant subscription fees for premium features, simply because the tool has become the structural foundation of their daily workflow.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so what is the third compounding benefit?
The third is supercharging growth through viral acceleration.
Viral growth.
Right. When users engage more frequently and deeply with a platform, they inadvertently generate more surface area to pull entirely new users into the ecosystem.
The classic example of this is the tagging architecture on Facebook.
Yes. The more habitually addicted I am to the platform, the more frequently I upload photographs, and the more aggressively I tag my social network in those images.
And every single tag you execute automatically generates an external trigger.
Like an email alert or a push notification.
That is sent directly to your friend, pulling them into the beginning of the hook model.
So higher habitual engagement doesn't merely sustain the existing user base. It actively, aggressively accelerates the acquisition of new users.
Exactly. And that brings us to the final and perhaps most crucial benefit in a hyper-competitive market: sharpening the competitive edge.
Ingrained user habits act as a massive, almost impenetrable defensive moat against rival companies.
A huge moat.
I really want to dissect this point because it contradicts a deeply held piece of Silicon Valley dogma.
The better mousetrap fallacy.
Exactly. The prevailing assumption is that a demonstrably objectively superior product will inevitably capture the market. If you build a better mousetrap, the world beats a path to your door, right? It's a pervasive, romanticized myth that leads countless startups to absolute ruin.
Really?
Yes,
Yeah.
an objectively better product frequently loses if adopting it requires the consumer to abandon a deeply entrenched habit.
Because of the friction.
Right. The cognitive and emotional friction of unlearning a behavior often outweighs the marginal utility gained from the new product.
The historical case study that completely obliterates the better product wins myth is the physical keyboard interface we both use every single day.
The QWERTY keyboard layout.
Precisely. To understand the absurdity of QWERTY, we have to look back to the 1870s and the invention of the Scholes and Glidden typewriter.
The 1870s.
Yeah. The QWERTY layout was not designed for speed or ergonomic efficiency. It was engineered specifically to solve a mechanical failure.
Oh, because the keys were jamming.
Right. Early typists were moving too fast for the physical metal type bars, causing them to clash and jam together. The QWERTY layout deliberately distributed the most commonly used English letters far apart across the keyboard to purposefully slow the typist down and prevent mechanical jams.
That is wild. So the entire interface was purposefully handicapped to accommodate a mechanical limitation of 19th century metallurgy.
A limitation that hasn't existed since the advent of digital word processing. It is a profound technological anachronism.
And yet, it remains completely dominant.
Completely. Since the 1870s, numerous alternative layouts have been developed, most notably the Dvorak simplified keyboard.
Right, I've heard of Dvorak.
Studies mathematically demonstrate that the Dvorak layout is vastly superior. It dramatically reduces the distance fingers must travel, allowing for significantly faster typing speeds and reducing repetitive strain injuries.
So it is, by every objective metric, a vastly superior product.
Yet it has universally failed to achieve any meaningful mass adoption. Because the neurological macro for QWERTY typing is so deeply burned into the basal ganglia of billions of users, the cognitive cost, the intense frustration, and the steep learning curve required to break the QWERTY habit and build the Dvorak habit is simply too high.
It entirely negates the long-term benefits of the superior product.
Exactly. The implications for founders and innovators are incredibly sobering. The mandate is not simply to engineer a better product. You must engineer a product that forms a stronger habit.
Right. If your solution only offers a marginal improvement in utility, It will inevitably be crushed by the sheer inertia of established user routines.
To unseat an incumbent, your product must offer a leap in utility so massive that it justifies the agony of behavioral change.
Or you must focus entirely on acquiring users who have not yet formed a habit with your competitor.
Which necessitates a very precise understanding of the parameters required to form a habit in the first place.
And this brings us to the analytical framework of the habit zone.
Right, the habit zone. Because not every repeated behavior is capable of crossing the neurological threshold into an automatic routine. The behavior must land securely within this habit zone.
Correct. The framework maps this zone across a graph governed by two intersecting axes: frequency and perceived utility.
Okay, let's define those. Frequency simply measures the volume of occurrences, how many times a day or a week the behavior is executed.
And perceived utility measures the subjective value or reward the user extracts from the behavior relative to alternative options.
So frequency and utility, how do they interact?
Well, the interaction between these two variables reveals exactly why certain products succeed while others fail. Consider the behavioral profile of using Google search.
Okay.
The frequency of the behavior is astronomical. We query search engines dozens of times a day.
Sure.
However, if we objectively measure the perceived utility, meaning the actual quality of the search results, is Google demonstrably vastly superior to Bing?
That's a good question.
In blind side-by-side comparisons, the output is often nearly indistinguishable to the average user. But because the frequency of the behavior is so incredibly high, the action easily breaches the threshold and sits firmly inside the habit zone.
Now, contrast that with a platform like Amazon. The behavioral profile is inverted, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Most users are not purchasing physical goods on Amazon 50 times a day. The frequency is considerably lower than a search engine query.
However, the perceived utility of the platform is absolutely colossal.
Colossal. The user possesses the profound knowledge that they can locate virtually any manufactured object on Earth, purchase it with a single frictionless click, and have it physically manifested at their front door within 48 hours.
That immense, overwhelming utility easily compensates for the lower frequency, anchoring Amazon firmly within the habit zone despite the lack of daily repetition.
Exactly. But the crucial caveat here, as outlined in the text, involves the absolute necessity of frequency.
Why is frequency so critical?
Well, a behavior that offers relatively minimal utility can still cross the threshold into a habit if it is repeated with sufficient frequency. However, there are certain behaviors that, regardless of how much massive utility they provide, will never solidify into automatic habits if they lack sufficient frequency.
Like what?
Behaviors that occur infrequently, like buying a house or filing annual taxes. They always demand high cognitive load and conscious deliberation. They never become basal ganglia macros.
That makes total sense. And this framework provides a definitive answer to one of the most persistent debated questions in Silicon Valley boardrooms.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about.
When founders pitch venture capitalists, the investors almost inevitably ask, are you building a vitamin or are you building a painkiller?
Yes. It is a foundational metaphor in product strategy.
So vitamins are categorized as nice-to-have supplements, right? They appeal to our higher-order emotional desire to optimize our health or feel productive.
But they lack urgency. If you forget to take your daily multivitamin for 3 weeks, you experience no immediate physical distress. You don't even notice the omission.
Painkillers, conversely, address an immediate, acute distress.
If you wake up with a debilitating migraine, acquiring a painkiller becomes your absolute priority. You will abandon whatever you are doing to solve the problem.
Right. And understandably, the investment community has historically prioritized painkillers as they cater to an immediate, undeniable market demand.
But when we apply this lens to the titans of the habit economy platforms like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or Pinterest, the categorization becomes incredibly murky.
It really does. I mean, when you were first pitched the concept of an application designed exclusively to apply vintage filters to photographs of your lunch.
It sounds like the quintessential vitamin.
Exactly. It appears to be a trivial, entirely dispensable nice-to-have.
So which is it? Are these products vitamins or painkillers? Well, the brilliant unifying synthesis presented in this research requires us to fundamentally redefine our understanding of pain in a digital context. We aren't discussing physical agony. We are discussing an itch.
An itch. I like that.
It is a psychological discomfort, a micro-stressor, like a moment of intense boredom, a twinge of social isolation, a fleeting sense of uncertainty, or the pervasive anxiety of missing out on cultural conversations.
And evolutionary biology dictates that when we experience that discomfort, we instinctively, automatically seek a mechanism to alleviate it.
Exactly right. So when we ask if these massive social platforms are vitamins or painkillers, the profound answer is that habit-forming products operate as both, depending on where the user is in their life cycle.
Both. How does that work?
In the initial acquisition phase, they absolutely function as vitamins. When you create your first Instagram account, it is merely a fun, optional tool for creative expression.
Right.
But as the user cycles repeatedly through the phases of the hook, model, trigger, action, reward, investment, the neurological pathways myelinate. The habit is established.
And the core defining characteristic of a solidified habit is that the absence of the behavior induces pain.
Yes, it actively generates the psychological itch.
If your neurological macro is programmed to open a social feed every time you experience the friction of waiting in a line and suddenly your phone battery dies, you don't just feel minor annoyance.
You experience a very real, palpable surge of anxiety and discomfort.
The nature of the product has fundamentally transformed. It originated as a vitamin, but through behavioral engineering, it has successfully mutated into an indispensable painkiller.
A painkiller that is required to soothe the exact psychological distress it helped manufacture.
It represents a total paradigm shift in how we conceptualize product value. A company does not necessarily need to invent a miraculous cure for a massive pre-existing societal ailment.
No, the strategy is to identify a frequent, minor psychological itch and reliably, consistently soothe that itch until your specific interface becomes the default automatic salve for millions of human minds.
Man, we have dissected an immense volume of behavioral architecture today.
We really have.
We have traversed from the collapse of the Madison Avenue advertising model, deeply into the evolutionary mechanics of the basal ganglia and dopamine receptors, and ultimately arrived at the profound financial implications of a manufactured psychological itch. So, how do we synthesize all of this?
If we distill this vast amount of research into a single cohesive realization, it is this. The digital environment we inhabit, the interfaces we are compelled to stare at, the applications that consume our cognitive bandwidth, none of these are products of serendipity or chance.
No.
They represent the apex of meticulous, highly calculated behavioral engineering. When you feel your attention slipping toward your screen, it is not wandering aimlessly. It is being actively captured by deliberate design.
But the empowering takeaway for you listening to this deep dive is that comprehending this architecture fundamentally alters your relationship with it.
Absolutely.
By internalizing the mechanics of the hook model and by recognizing how your own basal ganglia prioritizes efficiency over agency, you transition from being a passive subject of behavioral engineering to an active, informed architect.
Whether your goal is to build an enduring enterprise, design software that genuinely benefits humanity, or simply reclaim sovereignty over your own dopamine receptors, the blueprint is now exposed.
You understand the precise alchemy required to transform a fleeting vitamin into an entrenched painkiller that operates seamlessly within the human subconscious.
You now grasp the fundamental anatomy of a hook. You understand the mechanisms that drive unparalleled customer lifetime value, provide ruthless pricing flexibility, ignite viral expansion, and construct impenetrable defenses against competing technologies.
Armed with that comprehension, the mandate is to scrutinize your own digital ecosystem. As you look at the products you build, or the ones you consume, you must ask yourself, what precise combination of friction and motivation compels that very first fateful interaction?
That's the real question.
And even more critically, what is the specific hidden emotional spark plug that will continually ignite the engine of that behavior? Let that question linger in your prefrontal cortex the next time your hand automatically, unthinkingly reaches into your pocket. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning, right? You walk out to your driveway and you get into your car to head to work. You strap in, put the car in drive, and pull out into traffic.
Just a completely normal, everyday routine.
Exactly, just a normal Tuesday. But a few miles down the road, you look down at your hands and you realize you aren't actually driving.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you are just sitting in the driver's seat. You're watching the steering wheel turn completely on its own.
That sounds absolutely terrifying.
Right. You feel your foot pressing the brake and the gas pedal, but you aren't the one giving the orders. You are entirely a passenger in your own body.
I think anyone would probably panic in that situation. You'd feel completely violated and, well, totally out of control.
Exactly. But what if almost half of everything you do today, the way you communicate, the way you shop, the way you consume information, isn't actually a conscious choice? What if it's a programmed response just like that ghost-driven car?
It is a profound realization when you finally see it happening in your own life. And even more unsettling, what if the digital products you interact with every single day are actively, intentionally engineering those unconscious responses?
That is exactly what we are getting into today. In this deep dive, we are exploring the architecture of those automatic behaviors.
We all walk around carrying this deeply ingrained belief that we are the conscious authors of our daily narrative. We just assume that from the moment our alarm goes off, we are weighing options and making deliberate, rational decisions.
But the neurological reality is that a massive portion of our daily behavior operates completely under the radar of our conscious awareness. We are literally flying on autopilot.
We really are. And in the modern economy, the businesses that understand the mechanics of that autopilot possess an extraordinary advantage over those that just rely on building a functionally good product.
So today we are looking at the specific mechanisms that make some products become utterly indispensable in your life, while other, arguably better products, completely fail to catch on.
You are about to learn the psychology and the biology behind your own user routines.
And whether you are building a business, designing a product, or you just want to figure out why you instinctively reach for your phone every time you stand in a grocery store line, understanding this hidden machinery is an absolute superpower.
It truly dictates the winners and losers of the modern tech landscape. But to understand how companies monetize our daily routines, we have to start at the bedrock.
Right, the actual physical biology.
Exactly. We have to look at the biological machinery of the brain, because that is where the physical reality of a habit actually lives.
I think we throw the word habit around so casually that it loses its meaning.
Oh, absolutely.
Someone says, like, I have a habit of drinking coffee, or I have a bad habit of interrupting people, and it just sounds like a personality quirk.
Right. It sounds behavioral, not physical.
Yeah.
But biologically, something highly mechanical is happening inside our heads. From a neurobiological standpoint, a habit is strictly defined as a behavior done with little or no conscious thought.
And to understand why the brain does this, you really have to look at human evolution and energy management, right?
Yes, exactly. The brain is an incredibly energy-hungry organ. It accounts for a huge percentage of our resting metabolic rate.
It's just constantly burning calories.
Yeah. And conscious deliberation, actually analyzing a new environment, weighing the pros and cons of an action, and making a novel decision costs an enormous amount of mental calories.
So to survive and conserve that precious energy, the brain is constantly, desperately looking for shortcuts. So it's fundamentally an efficiency engine.
Exactly that. When the brain encounters a brand new situation, it has no choice but to actively deliberate. It fires on all cylinders.
It's figuring things out in real time.
Right. But once it finds a solution that works, a sequence of actions that solves the problem or provides a reward, it stops deliberating.
It just takes that successful behavioral script, packages it up, and stores it away. And it puts it in a very specific, ancient part of the brain called the basal ganglia.
Yes, the basal ganglia.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. That's the brain center for involuntary actions, right?
It is. It's situated deep within the brain, close to the brainstem, and it's involved in motor control, behaviors, and emotions.
So once a behavioral script is locked in there, the brain no longer has to spend expensive conscious energy on that specific problem.
Precisely. It just monitors the environment for a familiar cue, and when it sees one, it automatically executes the script.
There is a brilliant anecdote from the source material that perfectly captures just how entirely the basal ganglia can hijack our physical bodies.
Oh, the runner story. I love this one.
It's so good. So it's about a man who has a deeply ingrained routine of jogging first thing in the morning. Every single day, he wakes up, puts on his shoes, runs his route, comes home, takes a shower, and shaves for the workday.
A very standard, well-worn behavioral pathway.
Completely paved over in his mind. But one day, his schedule gets thrown into chaos. He has an early morning overseas client call, so he can't do his morning run.
So he is forced to push his jog to the evening, right at dusk. The environment has changed drastically, but the internal programming hasn't.
Right. So he is running along his normal route, but the sun is going down. He passes a neighbor who is taking out the trash.
And they make eye contact.
Yeah, she smiles at him, and he automatically blurts out, "Good morning."
Which is so funny.
He instantly realizes how absurd that sounds at 7 p.m. He feels a flush of embarrassment, and he tries to shake it off. But then, maybe 10 minutes later, he passes another runner on the trail.
And again, as if possessed by a ghost, he loudly says, "Good morning."
It's wild. His brain wasn't consulting the position of the sun or Checking a clock?
No, not at all. The basal ganglia recognize the sensory input of running on the trail and passing another human, and it just hit play on the audio file that says good morning.
And it gets even crazier when he gets back to his house. He finishes his evening run, walks inside, and jumps into his normal post-run shower.
Following the script.
Exactly. His mind starts wandering, maybe thinking about dinner or the call he had earlier. Suddenly, he feels a sharp scratch on his cheek.
He looks down, and he realizes he has lathered up his entire face with shaving cream.
Yes. And he has started dragging a razor across his skin. He had absolutely zero need to shave at 8:00 p.m.
But because he always shaves in his post-run shower, the context triggered the script. He was physically acting out a complex motor function with zero mindful awareness.
That dissociation is the hallmark of a fully formed habit. We see the exact same neurological shortcut play out in less benign ways too, like chronic nail biting.
Right. If you trace the origin of a nail-biting habit, a person usually starts doing it for a very specific conscious reason. Maybe they have a rough cuticle or a pesky hangnail.
So they bite it to remove the annoyance?
Yeah. But over time, the brain starts linking the physical action of biting to the feeling of relief, and eventually the trigger shifts entirely.
The trigger becomes the unconscious feeling of stress.
Oh, right. Yes. The person might be sitting in traffic or reading a stressful email, and they feel a microdose of anxiety.
And the basal ganglia senses that anxiety, searches its database for a script that previously provided relief, and deploys the nail-biting routine.
Exactly. The person isn't consciously thinking about their cuticles at all. They might not even realize their fingers are in their mouth until someone points it out.
The behavior has become entirely detached from its original purpose. It makes me think of how computers' cache memory works.
That is a great analogy.
Like, when you visit a website for the very first time, your computer has to work hard to download all the images, the logos, the formatting. It takes time and processing power.
Right. It's a heavy lift.
But your browser saves all those heavy assets in its cache. So the next time you visit that same website, the processor doesn't have to build it from scratch.
It just pulls the saved version instantly from the cache, freeing up your computer's RAM to do other things.
Exactly. Our basal ganglia is essentially caching our behaviors, so our conscious mind has the bandwidth to scan for new threats or learn new things.
And that cache memory analogy brings up another vital layer here. If a browser didn't cache those assets, the user experience would be agonizingly slow every single time.
The computer would eventually overheat or crash under constant load.
Yeah, and the human brain is the same. If you had to consciously deliberate over every single micro movement required to tie your shoes, or back your car out of the driveway, or measure the coffee grounds for your morning cup.
Your cognitive reserves would be entirely depleted by 9:00 a.m.
Exactly. So if I'm a developer or an entrepreneur listening to this, I'm realizing that this isn't just a fun biology lesson. This is the fundamental constraint of human-computer interaction.
Because humans are biologically driven to avoid cognitive load.
Right. If I design an app or a software platform or a checkout process that forces my users to engage in heavy, conscious deliberation every single time they log in, I am fighting millions of years of evolution.
If they constantly have to remember how the navigation works or why they even opened the app in the first place, they're going to bail.
The user's brain will eventually reject that heavy cognitive load. It will actively seek out a competitor that allows it to operate on autopilot.
That biological demand for cognitive ease is the dividing line between products that survive and products that define a generation.
And once you internalize that the brain is an energy-hoarding machine, you start to see why this autopilot mechanism is the holy grail for a company's bottom line.
We should clarify, though, that not every single business needs to engineer these deep, daily habits. It depends on the frequency of the problem you are solving.
That's a crucial distinction. Take the life insurance industry, for example.
Right, totally different beast.
You do not need your customer to log into a life insurance portal every morning while they drink their coffee. That entire business model is built on a very heavy, conscious, highly deliberative one-time purchase.
It relies on salesmanship, on stark mortality statistics, on heavy advertising.
Exactly. But once that policy is signed, the interaction is largely over. The company doesn't need daily engagement to collect the premium.
But if your business model requires ongoing, frequent interaction, if you are building social media platforms, productivity software, Mobile games, e-commerce ecosystems, or even fitness apps, creating a habit isn't just a nice feature.
No, it is the core economic engine of the company. Because when a product seamlessly integrates into the basal ganglia, it generates a phenomenon called unprompted user engagement.
Okay, let's talk about unprompted user engagement, because that really is the ultimate metric of product success.
It means the user returns to your product completely on their own volition, over and over again. And the best part, the company doesn't have to spend money to bring them back.
Let's contrast that with traditional marketing for a second. In the old world, if a company wanted you to think about their product, they had to buy external triggers.
Right, like renting a billboard on the highway you drive to work.
Or they had to buy a commercial slot during a television show you watch. Or send a piece of direct mail to your physical mailbox.
All of those things are incredibly expensive, and their effectiveness decays the moment you stop paying for them.
But when a product forms a habit, the trigger moves from the external environment to the internal environment.
The company no longer has to buy the billboard on the highway because the user's own basal ganglia acts as an internal billboard.
That is mind-blowing. The moment the user feels a specific internal state, boredom, loneliness, the need for organization, their brain automatically flashes the logo of the product.
Yes, the user initiates the engagement themselves.
So what does this all mean for traditional marketing? If my marketing cost drops to near zero because my users' brains are doing the advertising for me, what happens to my metrics?
Several compounding financial effects take hold. The first and most obvious is a drastic increase in customer lifetime value, or CLTV.
CLTV is simply the total amount of revenue a business can reasonably expect to extract from a single customer throughout the entire duration of their relationship.
Exactly. And habitual users, by definition, stick around longer. They churn at a much lower rate, and they interact more frequently.
Over a span of years, the value generated by a user operating on autopilot is exponential compared to a user who has to be constantly reacquired with expensive marketing campaigns.
There is also a massive shift in pricing power. I love how Warren Buffett looks at this.
Oh yeah, Buffett's philosophy here is brilliant. When he evaluates a business, he doesn't just look at the balance sheet, he looks at the psychology of the consumer.
He famously said that the single most important decision in evaluating a business is pricing power.
If you have the power to raise prices without losing business to a competitor, you have a great business. And if you need a prayer session before raising the price by 10%, you have a terrible business.
Right, and Buffett and his longtime partner Charlie Munger were obsessive about consumer psychology. Their massive investments in companies like Coca-Cola or See's Candies were driven by this exact understanding.
Because when a customer forms a deep daily routine around a product, they don't just prefer it, they depend upon it.
And dependency fundamentally alters price sensitivity. When an action is fully automated in the basal ganglia, the friction of consciously breaking that habit, researching an alternative, and learning a new system is incredibly high.
So the company gains the flexibility to raise prices because for the user, paying a little bit more is still far less painful than the cognitive agony of breaking the habit.
Exactly. We can see this mechanic weaponized perfectly in the free-to-play gaming industry. Let's look at the absolute juggernaut that was Candy Crush Saga.
Oh man, Candy Crush. That game amassed hundreds of millions of downloads and at its peak was netting nearly $1 million a day.
And that wasn't revenue, that was net profit. $1 million every single day from people swiping colorful digital candies on their phones.
But the most important part of their strategy is when they asked for that money.
They executed the freemium model with absolute psychological precision. If they had put a $4.99 price tag on the game in the App Store, it would have introduced a massive barrier of conscious deliberation.
A potential player would have to stop, evaluate their budget, read reviews, and make a highly rational decision.
And conscious deliberation is the sworn enemy of habit formation.
Right, so instead, they remove all friction. The download is free.
The first levels are incredibly easy, practically playing themselves, rewarding the user with flashing lights and deep, booming audio praising them.
They let you play for free day after day until the physical action of swiping candies while waiting for the bus becomes completely wired into your cache memory.
Only after the behavioral script is locked in, only when the user is deep in the habit zone and their desire to progress to the next level is overwhelmingly strong, do they introduce scarcity.
You run out of lives. Now you have a choice. Wait 24 hours to play again, or pay a tiny, almost negligible fee to continue instantly.
Converting a user into a paying customer is infinitely easier when you are asking them to pay to continue an automatic behavior they are already craving, rather than asking them to pay to start a behavior they don't yet care about.
It's brilliant. And it's not just mobile games. Let's talk about productivity software, specifically Evernote.
Yeah, Evernote.
Back in 2011, their CEO, Phil Libin, presented a chart at a conference that became legendary in Silicon Valley. It's universally known as the smile graph.
And it perfectly visualizes the financial trajectory of a habit-forming product. The smile graph is a fascinating look at user retention and monetization over time.
Imagine a standard graph where the vertical axis represents user engagement and the horizontal axis represents time.
For a typical product, the graph usually starts high on day one when people download it, and then steadily declines as users lose interest and churn out. It looks like a ski slope.
But Evernote's graph didn't look like a ski slope. It started high if people downloaded the app and poked around. Then, over the next few weeks, engagement plummeted.
People forgot about it or didn't understand how to integrate it into their lives. The line dropped off a cliff and bottomed out.
But then, for the users who stuck around, something magical happened.
Those remaining users started putting one or two things into the system: a recipe, a business card, a flight itinerary.
Slowly, the act of saving information to Evernote became a reliable solution to the problem of forgetting things. The basal ganglia began storing the script.
And as that habit formed, the engagement line on the graph stopped falling, flattened out, and then began a steep, aggressive climb upward and to the right.
Forming the shape of a massive smile.
Exactly. And the financial correlation was undeniable. Evernote discovered that in the first month, when the habit wasn't yet formed, a tiny fraction of users were willing to pay for the premium version.
But as the months turned into years and the habit deepened, the willingness to pull out a credit card skyrocketed.
The sheer density of the habit created an incredible dependency, and that dependency generated reliable, recurring revenue.
Beyond CLTV and pricing power, these automated routines also supercharge viral loops. If I only open an app once a month, my chances of sharing it with someone else are minuscule.
But if I'm engaging with a social platform multiple times a day, let's say I'm constantly taking photos and tagging my friends, I am pulling those friends back into the platform with me.
The speed of the habit dictates the speed of the viral loop.
This is why mastering the psychology of the user is non-negotiable for modern startups. If your business model requires daily or weekly engagement, you cannot brute force your way to profitability by relying on paid acquisition.
The math simply does not work. You have to design an environment where the user's own internal routines take over the heavy lifting of growth and retention.
But wait, if unprompted engagement is this powerful and the financial rewards are this staggering, why isn't every single app on my phone a billion-dollar company?
That's the million-dollar question, right? Surely every product manager and developer knows these metrics by now. Why don't they just build a slightly better version of whatever I'm currently using and steal my attention?
They might understand the metrics, but they consistently underestimate the biological accounting system they are up against.
Because the human brain does not evaluate products purely on their objective merits.
Right. It actively, stubbornly resists adopting new routines, even if those new routines are logically superior. We are dealing with a phenomenon known as the LIFO effect.
The LIFO effect. This directly challenges the biggest myth in business. The idea that if you build a better mousetrap, the world will beat a path to your door.
In the realm of habit-forming products, being objectively better is rarely enough to win. To understand why the better mousetrap fails, we have to borrow a concept from accounting.
Okay, LIFO, last in, first out.
Exactly. In inventory management, it means the most recently produced items are the first ones sold. When applied to neurobiology, it describes how the brain prioritizes its stored behavioral scripts.
The habits we have most recently acquired the last in are the ones we discard the fastest, the first out. They are incredibly fragile.
It makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint. An old habit is a proven survival tactic. Your brain knows that doing things the old way kept you alive yesterday, so it trusts that pathway.
A brand new habit is untested. It hasn't proven its worth yet, so the brain treats it with intense suspicion.
That's a great way to frame it. The neural pathways of our old habits are thick, reinforced, and deeply entrenched. They are page highways in the mind.
Building a new habit is like trying to hack a new path through a dense jungle with a machete.
The moment you drop the machete, the moment you lose conscious focus or get distracted, the jungle immediately reclaims the path and you find yourself right back on the paved highway of your old routine.
Or, to use a different visual, building a new habit is like writing a message in wet sand right at the edge of the ocean. It takes effort to carve the letters, and the very first wave of fatigue or distraction that comes along washes it completely away.
But your old habits, those are carved deep into solid stone. They aren't going anywhere.
Those old stone carvings remain completely intact, just sitting there in the dark, waiting to reactivate.
To illustrate the sheer terrifying force of those old neural pathways, consider the statistics surrounding behavioral change in high-stakes environments.
Yeah, these numbers are wild.
Roughly two-thirds of alcoholics who successfully complete a rigorous rehabilitation program will experience a relapse within a single year.
And nearly everyone who manages to lose a significant amount of weight on a diet will regain those pounds within 2 years.
Even when the conscious motivation is a matter of literal life and death, the gravity of the basal ganglia's old programming often overpowers the conscious mind.
Those numbers are brutal. It really emphasizes that we aren't just talking about a lack of willpower, we are talking about a physical battle against the architecture of the brain.
And when we bring this back to the technology world, this biological resistance explains why incumbent dominant companies are almost impossible to dethrone with just a future update.
Let's look at the classic battle between search engines, Google versus Bing.
The search engine market is the perfect laboratory to observe the LIFO effect in action. By all objective measures, Bing is an incredibly powerful, highly sophisticated search engine.
In fact, numerous blind incognito tests have been conducted where users are shown side-by-side search results without knowing which engine provided which.
In the vast majority of these studies, users cannot tell the difference in quality. Bing's results are arguably just as relevant and useful as Google's.
But Google holds a near monopoly on search. And it's not because I sit down at my computer, analyze my search needs, compare the algorithms, and rationally select Google.
No, it's because Googling isn't a product choice anymore. It is an ingrained motor reflex.
If I'm arguing with a friend about how tall the Eiffel Tower is, the time between the question forming in my mind and my fingers typing GOGLE into the address bar is practically zero.
Google has successfully carved its pathway into the stone of your basal ganglia. The neural connection between the trigger of not knowing something and the action of typing into Google is instantaneous.
So for Microsoft to break that habit and win you over to Bing, it is not enough for Bing to be a slightly better product.
It's not even enough for Bing to be twice as good. It has to be so overwhelmingly, undeniably superior that it generates enough conscious motivation for you to stop your automatic motor reflex, bypass the paved highway, and hack a new path through the jungle.
For a commodity action like web search, that level of superiority is almost impossible to achieve.
And the resistance isn't just internal muscle memory. These platforms also lock us in externally through a concept called stored value.
Stored value acts as a massive anchor that makes leaving a habit exponentially more painful.
Think about a product like Gmail or a platform like Instagram. The core functionality of sending an email or posting a photo can be easily replicated by a competitor.
But over years of habitual use, you have poured your life into those specific platforms. Your Gmail archive contains a decade of correspondence, receipts, and contacts.
Your Instagram profile holds your social graph, your memories, and the social capital of your follower count.
Right. So if I want to switch to a brand new email provider that has a beautifully designed interface and slightly better features, the friction isn't just learning the new interface.
The friction is abandoning the immense stored value you've built up. The more habitually you use the product, the more data you feed it, and the stickier the platform becomes.
But let me play devil's advocate for a moment here. If the LIFO effect is a biological law, and old habits are carved in stone, and incumbent companies are protected by massive walls of stored value, isn't this profoundly depressing for new entrepreneurs?
You can see that way for sure.
Should a startup founder looking at giants like Meta, Google, or Amazon just pack up their laptop and go get a corporate job? Is it even possible to compete?
It is entirely possible to compete, but it requires a fundamental shift in strategy. The mistake most startups make is trying to attack the stone carvings directly.
They try to build a better Google or a better Facebook?
Yes, they try to convince users to abandon a deeply entrenched habit for a marginal feature improvement. That is almost always a losing battle.
You just can't outmuscle the basal ganglia.
Exactly. The startups that achieve astronomical success do not attack old habits. They hunt for nascent behaviors.
They look for new technological shifts, like the transition to mobile phones or the rise of wearable tech or the advent of generative AI.
And they look for new, unaddressed emotional itches that these shifts create. They don't try to pave over an old highway.
They find a completely fresh, untouched stretch of wet sand where the user has no pre-existing habits, and they start carving their own pathways before anyone else even knows the beach is there.
So the critical check for anyone building a product is this. You must account for the immense biological friction of changing your customer's existing behavior.
You cannot evaluate your product in a vacuum. You have to evaluate it against the gravity of what the user is already doing on autopilot.
Which naturally requires a diagnostic tool. If we need to know whether our new product has a fighting chance of carving into stone, or if it's doomed to wash away in the wet sand, we need a way to measure its potential.
We have to determine if the behavior we're asking the user to perform actually falls into what is known as the habit zone.
Okay, let's visualize this. The habit zone is defined by a graph with two axes.
On the vertical axis, we plot frequency. This is a pure measure of time and repetition. How often does the user encounter the trigger and perform the behavior?
Is this an action they take once a year, once a month, once a week, or dozens of times a day?
On the horizontal axis, we plot perceived utility. This is the subjective value the user derives from the action.
Does it solve their problem significantly better, faster, or more delightfully than the alternative options available to them?
So for a new behavior to cross the threshold and actually crystallize into a habit, it has to score high enough on a combination of these two factors. But they're not equally weighted, are they?
No, they are not, and this is perhaps the most counterintuitive finding in the science of habit formation. A pivotal study conducted by researchers at University College London explored this exact dynamic.
They wanted to understand the mechanics of habit formation in everyday life, so they tracked participants who were trying to form the habit of flossing their teeth.
Flossing is the perfect test case. Everyone knows they should do it, the utility is obvious, it prevents dental disease, but most people struggle to automate it.
The researchers analyzed the data to see what factor had the highest correlation with the behavior actually becoming automatic.
The conclusion was definitive. High frequency is the dominant driving factor in habit formation. Above all else, the brain requires reps.
If an action is infrequent, it doesn't matter how incredibly useful or life-saving the utility is, the basal ganglia simply will not automate it.
It will remain a conscious, deliberate chore every single time you do it.
This explains why filing our annual taxes never becomes a habit. The utility of doing your taxes is massive. It literally keeps you out of federal prison.
But because you only do it once a year, your brain never gets the repetitions required to catch the behavior.
Every April, it feels like a heavy, frustrating cognitive load because you have to relearn the process from scratch.
Conversely, if you look at a behavior with incredibly high frequency, the required utility drops dramatically. Let's return to the Google example and plot it on this habit zone graph.
Most internet users search for information multiple times every single day. The frequency is astronomical.
Because it happens so often, the brain gets constant repetitions. Therefore, the perceived utility of Google doesn't actually need to be massively superior to Bing.
It only needs to be marginally acceptable. The sheer volume of frequency drives the behavior firmly into the habit zone.
But what happens when you have a business model that simply cannot rely on daily frequency? Let's look at Amazon.
Right. Most normal people don't buy physical products on Amazon multiple times a day. The frequency of online shopping is inherently lower than the frequency of web searching.
So, according to the math of the graph, if Amazon is at a severe disadvantage on the vertical frequency axis, how do they survive?
If you lack frequency, you must compensate with overwhelming force on the horizontal axis. You must vastly, exponentially over-deliver on perceived utility.
Amazon understood this implicitly. To make shopping on their platform a habit despite the lower frequency, they had to offer utility that no one else could match.
They built the everything store. They offered one-click checkout, obliterating friction. They created Prime for 2-day shipping.
They engineered an ecosystem where the utility of convenience and trust was so high that it compensated for the lack of daily reps.
And their dedication to building that utility of trust led to some tactics that look absolutely insane to a traditional retailer.
Oh, definitely.
Amazon will actively run advertisements for directly competitive products right there on their own item pages. You can be looking at a camera sold by Amazon, and right beneath the buy button, Amazon will show you a link to another retailer selling the exact same camera for $10 less.
Why on earth would a company intentionally cannibalize its own sale?
Because they are playing a much longer, much more lucrative game. They're optimizing for the habit, not the transaction.
A fascinating 2003 academic study demonstrated that consumers' preference and loyalty for an online retailer actually increases significantly when that retailer provides competitive price information.
By sacrificing a single short-term sale and pointing you to a cheaper competitor, Amazon is depositing massive amounts of utility into your trust account.
They're teaching your brain that Amazon is the definitive source of truth.
Exactly. The next time you need to buy a product, your brain remembers that Amazon was honest with you last time. They saved you money.
So instead of going to Google to search for the best price, your basal ganglia automatically directs you straight to Amazon.com.
They lose the margin on one item, but they win the lifetime habit of your purchasing behavior.
And this strategy isn't exclusive to tech giants. Progressive Insurance used this exact same playbook in a totally different industry.
Insurance is a historically low-frequency business.
To build utility, Progressive started offering a tool that showed customers not only Progressive's quote, but the quotes of their direct competitors, even when the competitor was cheaper.
Traditional insurance brokers thought this was financial suicide.
But the utility of that transparency was so high that it established Progressive as the default starting point for insurance shopping, helping drive their sales from around $3.4 billion to over $15 billion.
The sheer weight of perceived utility pushed a low-frequency interaction firmly into the habit zone.
So the analytical framework for developers is clear. You must ruthlessly plot your intended user behavior on this graph.
If you are building a product that is naturally only going to be used once a month, you are facing a massive biological headwind regarding frequency.
You have no choice but to over-deliver on perceived utility to make the experience unforgettable and highly rewarding.
If, however, the utility you offer is relatively low or commoditized, you must find creative ways to pull the user back into the product on a daily or hourly basis to force the repetitions.
But let me challenge the extreme end of that logic for a second.
Let's hear it.
Let's say I build a mobile app that has absolutely terrible utility. Doesn't solve a problem, it's not particularly fun, it's just a digital annoyance.
Okay.
If I somehow force my users to interact with it every single hour through aggressive push notifications, will it eventually become a habit, purely based on the brute force of high frequency?
Can any low-utility action become a habit if you force enough reps?
That is a great hypothetical, and the math of the habit zone graph actually accounts for it. If you look closely at the threshold line separating conscious action from habit, the line slopes downward as frequency increases.
Meaning, you need less utility if you have high frequency.
Right. However, the line is asymptotic.
Yeah.
It approaches the vertical axis of zero utility, but it never actually touches it.
Meaning you can never have absolute zero utility.
Correct. No matter how frequently a behavior occurs, if there is absolutely zero perceived utility, if it provides no reward, solves no problem, and offers no emotional relief, it will never become a frictionless habit.
It will forever remain a highly annoying conscious chore.
The brain is an energy-saving device.
Yeah?
But it isn't stupid. It will not save a shortcut that doesn't actually accomplish anything.
There must be some spark of utility, however small, to signal to the basal ganglia that this script is worth caching.
That makes perfect sense. The reward has to exist. So let's assume we've navigated the graph perfectly. We have balanced frequency and utility.
We have successfully crossed the asymptotic threshold, and our product has firmly taken root in the habit zone of our users' minds. What happens to the product at that point?
This is where we see the most profound psychological shift in the entire life cycle of a product.
Once an action enters the habit zone, the fundamental nature of the product literally changes categories in the mind of the user.
To illustrate this metamorphosis, we have to look at a classic, almost cliché question that venture capitalists ask startup founders in pitch meetings.
Oh, anyone who has ever watched a pitch competition knows this one.
The investor leans back, steeples their fingers, and asks, "Are you building a vitamin or are you building a painkiller?"
It is the ultimate litmus test in Silicon Valley. And conventional business wisdom has a very rigid, dogmatic answer to which one is better.
Every textbook says you must build a painkiller because the economics of a painkiller are undeniable. Painkillers solve an obvious, acute, and immediate need.
If you wake up with a migraine that feels like an ice pick in your forehead, you aren't debating the subtle chemical merits of different analgesics.
You aren't waiting for a sale. You just want the pain to stop, and you will gladly pay for Tylenol or Advil to make it happen.
Painkillers have a highly quantifiable market, the value proposition is instant, and the consumer intent is incredibly high.
Vitamins, on the other hand, appeal to an entirely different set of needs. They don't solve acute physical pain. They appeal to emotional and psychological needs. They're nice-to-haves.
You take a multivitamin in the morning, not because you feel physically sick, but because you want the psychological satisfaction of feeling like you are taking control of your health. It checks an emotional box.
And the defining characteristic of a vitamin is the lack of immediate consequence. If you are on a 2-week vacation and you forget to pack your daily multivitamin, your life doesn't fall apart.
You don't wake up in the middle of the night screaming in agony. You might feel a vague sense of missed routine, but there is no acute pain driving you to midnight pharmacies to buy more.
So, if the golden rule of business is to always build a painkiller, how do we explain the most dominant, successful, and deeply habit-forming consumer technology companies of the last 20 years?
If we look at the origins of Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest, or even TikTok, when those platforms launched, what were they actually selling? Were they vitamins or painkillers?
By the strict definitions we just laid out, they were absolutely vitamins. Before Mark Zuckerberg launched the Facebook at Harvard, there wasn't a single person waking up in a cold sweat, paralyzed by the acute pain of not being able to digitally update their status.
Or looking at photos of what their classmates ate for lunch.
Exactly. These platforms were not solving an obvious, burning pain point. They started as purely nice-to-have vitamins for social connection and novelty.
And this is the absolute crux of habit-forming design. Once that nice-to-have behavior crosses the threshold into the habit zone, a miraculous metamorphosis occurs.
Once you start logging in every day, and the basal ganglia wires that digital interaction into your brain's cache memory, not doing the behavior suddenly starts to cause a subtle psychological itch.
That itch is the defining marker of a fully formed habit. A habit is crystallized when the omission of the behavior causes a perceptible degree of pain.
Now, we are using the word pain very broadly here. We aren't talking about physical trauma. We are talking about psychological discomfort.
It is the micropain of boredom, the unease of uncertainty, the quiet ache of isolation, or the nagging feeling of being out of the loop.
Picture yourself waiting in line at the grocery store. The person in front of you is taking too long to find their payment card.
You have 30 seconds of unplanned, unstimulating downtime. Your brain registers a tiny, almost imperceptible pang of boredom. It's a psychological itch.
And before you can even formulate a conscious thought about what to do, your hand is already in your pocket. Your thumb has already unlocked your phone, and you are already scrolling through an algorithmic feed.
The platform provides immediate, reliable relief for that tiny psychological pain of boredom.
The product has successfully changed categories. What began its life as a casual take-it-or-leave-it vitamin for social connection has successfully attached itself to a recurring emotional itch.
Through the sheer force of repeated use in the habit zone, it has fundamentally transformed into the user's default painkiller.
That framework completely redefines how we should view product development. But I have to pause here, because the language we are using is intensely loaded.
Yeah, we should definitely address that.
When we talk about engineering itch in someone's brain and creating a digital painkiller to soothe that discomfort, it sounds like we are just using polite Silicon Valley jargon to describe addiction.
The ethical implications of intentionally designing products to hijack the basal ganglia seem pretty dark. Are we just teaching people how to build digital narcotics?
It is a critical distinction to make because the line between a habit and an addiction is often blurred in casual conversation. But biologically and psychologically, they are fundamentally different concepts.
An addiction is defined as a persistent, compulsive dependency on a behavior or substance that is inherently self-destructive.
It actively harms the user's life, damages their relationships, and impairs their ability to function.
So an addiction overrides the user's well-being.
Yes, it is a pathology. And from a design standpoint, intentionally engineering a product to cause destructive compulsion is highly unethical.
A habit, however, is simply an automatic behavioral response to an environmental or emotional cue. Habits are neurologically neutral.
They can be incredibly positive and life-enhancing. As we discussed, brushing your teeth is a habit. Putting on your seatbelt is a habit. Going for a run when you feel stressed is a habit.
The goal of understanding the psychology isn't to create destructive dependencies. The goal is to build positive, constructive habits that help users achieve the things they already want to do.
They just currently lack the frictionless routine to actually accomplish them.
If I want to learn a new language, or stick to a budget, or meditate daily, I want those apps to utilize the habit zone.
I want them to make the behavior automatic, so I don't have to burn conscious energy willing myself to do it. The power of the basal ganglia can be harnessed to significantly improve our lives.
When you view product design through that lens, it changes how you approach innovation. You
Yeah.
don't have to start by solving a massive, acute crisis.
You can start by building a delightful vitamin so long as you deeply understand the emotional itch you are ultimately going to soothe.
If we gather all these concepts and look at the big picture, the real revelation of this deep dive is a profound shift in how we understand market dominance.
The products that define our era don't win simply by having the most bullet points on a feature list, or the fastest processing architecture, or the loudest marketing budget.
They win by seamlessly, quietly integrating themselves into our biology.
They bypass the heavy, energy-draining machinery of the conscious mind entirely. They set up shop in the basal ganglia.
They offer just enough perceived utility paired with a high enough frequency of use to cross the threshold into the habit zone.
And through the alchemy of repetition, they undergo that incredible transformation from a casual vitamin into an indispensable painkiller for our daily psychological itches.
It's brilliant and honestly a little humbling to realize just how much of our daily narrative is driven by an invisible, energy-saving engine deep inside our heads.
It really makes you rethink your entire day.
Now that we understand the immense biological power of the habit zone, and we see why capturing the basal ganglia is the ultimate competitive advantage, it leaves us with a massive cliffhanger.
We know what a habit is, and we know why it's valuable.
Huh.
But what is the actual spark that starts this automated engine in the very first place?
If I have a new product, how do I get someone to take that very first conscious step before the habit is formed?
Next time, we are going to explore the fascinating mechanics of triggers to see exactly how our attention is captured, directed, and ultimately automated.
Because without a perfectly designed trigger, the habit loop can never begin. It is the catalyst for the entire process.
Exactly.
Until then, we want to leave you with a final thought to analyze today. The next time you have a free moment, take out your phone and look at the apps sitting right there on the first page of your home screen.
As you look at those colorful little icons, ask yourself, are you opening them because you made a conscious, deliberate choice that doing so would improve your day?
Or are you simply operating as a passenger in your own mind, blindly scratching an itch you didn't even know you had? Think about the very first thing you did when you woke up this morning.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Seriously, I want you to walk through those first few blurry moments. You open your eyes, the room is, still totally dark. You reach an arm out from under the covers.
Right.
And did you consciously, deliberately decide to check your phone right then? Or was that behavior engineered for you by a tiny, invisible piece of grit?
It is, it's a genuinely unsettling question when you actually pause to sit with it for a second.
Yeah.
Because we all operate under this, comforting illusion that we are the sole authors of our daily routines. We really like to think every single action is a choice. But the reality of that morning phone grab is, well, it's far more mechanical.
It totally feels mechanical once you start paying attention to it. And to really ground this idea, consider a story about a young woman named Yin.
Okay.
So picture her. She's in her mid-20s. She's living in Palo Alto, attending Stanford University.
Right. So very smart, very driven.
Exactly. By all outward appearances, she is the absolute definition of put together. She has all the composure, the polish, and, the intellectual rigor you would expect from someone navigating that highly competitive environment.
Sure.
Yet, woven throughout her entire day between classes and meetings, she succumbs to this persistent, undeniable habit. She is compulsively opening and using Instagram.
And the crucial part of Yin's story isn't just the behavior itself. Snapping dozens of pictures a day, applying those moody, high-contrast filters. It's her perception of that behavior.
Right.
If you were to sit down and actually ask her about it,
Yeah.
she wouldn't describe it as a compulsion.
Right.
She doesn't realize she is hooked.
Not at all. Her defense is completely casual. She basically says, oh, it's just fun. I don't have a problem or anything. I just use it whenever I see something cool. I feel like I need to grab it before it's gone. Yeah, she genuinely believes she is just enjoying a fun piece of software. She is completely unaware that her seemingly spontaneous desire to capture a moment is actually, well, the result of a carefully constructed multi-step chain reaction designed by engineers.
Right. And that gap between our perceived autonomy and the engineered reality of our habits, that is exactly what we are dissecting today.
Which brings us to our core mission for this deep dive. Today, we're exploring the trigger.
The trigger.
Yeah, this is the absolute bedrock foundation of any habit-forming product. If you are listening to this and you have like any interest in business, product design, entrepreneurship, or even just understanding your own psychology, this is the master key.
Absolutely.
Understanding triggers is the ultimate difference between building a product or service that someone might use once and forget about, and building something they quite literally cannot imagine living without.
In the broader architecture of how technologies change human behavior, the trigger is, it's the spark plug.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, it is the actuator. You can build the most beautiful, highly functional, life-changing application in the world, but without a trigger, the engine of user behavior never even turns over. The habit, it never begins.
I love that we are starting here because there is this fantastic analogy used to explain the biological and psychological reality of how habits form. They don't just like materialize out of thin air.
Right.
You don't wake up one day and decide, I'm going to have a checking my phone in bed habit. Habits require a foundation, and the analogy we have is an oyster creating a pearl.
It is such a vivid way to look at it, the pearl and the irritant.
Yeah.
Culturally, we view pearls as these beautiful, luxurious, naturally occurring treasures. We put them on necklaces and rings. But from the oyster's perspective, a pearl is not a luxury item.
Definitely not.
An oyster doesn't randomly decide to manufacture a pearl on a Tuesday afternoon because it feels creative.
It's a literal defense mechanism. The entire process only begins because of an invasion. It requires the arrival of a tiny irritant. We are talking about a microscopic piece of grit or a parasite that somehow manages to slip inside the oyster's shell.
Exactly. That tiny, unwelcome invader is the biological trigger.
Right.
Once that piece of grit is inside the sensitive tissue of the oyster, it triggers an automatic biological system. The oyster's defense is to protect itself from the sharp edges of the grit by blanketing it with layer upon layer of a smooth substance called nacre, which we commonly call mother of pearl.
Wow.
And over years, those layers accumulate, smoothing out the painful irritant and eventually forming the pearl.
So bringing this back to us, humans navigating an incredibly complex, notification-heavy digital world, what does this mean for our behavior?
Well, it means that our habits, much like that pearl, cannot exist without an initial irritant. A trigger is the grit in our own mental oyster.
Mental oyster, right.
Yeah, it is the actuator of behavior. And these triggers come in incredibly varied forms. Sometimes they're impossible to ignore, like a blaring morning alarm clock or a calendar notification popping up right in the middle of your screen.
Ugh, yeah, those are loud.
Right. Other times, they are incredibly subtle subconscious signals that influence our actions without us ever really registering them. But regardless of whether they are loud or quiet, triggers are the starting line. They are the things that propel us out of a state of rest and into a state of action.
If you are an entrepreneur or a creator or anyone trying to change behavior, it changes how you view your job entirely. You cannot change behavior without first designing that starting foundation.
Exactly.
You have to figure out how to be the perfect piece of grit for your user.
You really have to master the initiation of the chain reaction. And to truly master it, we have to divide these triggers into two distinct categories. The first category is the most visible external triggers.
The outside nudge, like a tap on the shoulder.
Precisely. Habit-forming technologies almost always start the process of changing behavior by first cueing users with an external call to action.
Okay.
These are sensory stimuli. They are things you can see, hear, or feel. But they aren't just empty noises or flashing lights. They are stimuli embedded with specific information. And that information tells the user with absolute clarity what they're supposed to do next.
Think about how this manifests in the physical world. Let's look at a classic Coca-Cola vending machine.
Okay, classic example.
If you walk past one of these machines, you aren't just seeing a red metal box that dispenses liquid. The design is incredibly intentional. On the front of the machine, there is a large, high-resolution image of a welcoming man. He isn't just standing there. He is physically holding out a refreshing, condensation-covered bottle of Coke, extending it directly toward you.
Right.
And right below that image, there is a single word in bold text: thirsty.
It is a masterclass in explicit instruction, and it's delivered without a wall of text. The external trigger, the combination of the man offering the drink and that single probing question, thirsty, implicitly and explicitly dictates the next physical action. It removes all ambiguity.
Totally.
The expected action is immediately clear reach into your pocket, pull out money, insert it into the slot, and press the button.
It is telling you exactly how to resolve the scenario it just presented. And this same psychology translates perfectly to the digital space. Consider an email from a financial service, like mint.com.
Good example.
If you receive an account alert email from them, it doesn't just give you a block of text explaining your bank balance. Right in the middle of the screen, impossible to miss, is a giant bright orange button. And the text on the button says, log into Mint. It leaves absolutely zero guesswork for the user.
Let's pause and actually unpack why that bright orange button is so vital, because it really comes down to a concept called cognitive load.
Okay, cognitive load.
Yeah. Cognitive load is essentially the amount of mental effort required to process information and make a decision. Every time a user has to pause and think, okay, what am I supposed to do with this information? Where do I click? How do I navigate there? You are adding friction. You are increasing their cognitive load.
And friction is the enemy of action.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Friction kills conversions. When an email has a giant high contrast button that says log into Mint, it drops the cognitive load to near zero.
Right.
The thinking required to take the next action is virtually eliminated. By reducing the mental effort, you exponentially increase the statistical likelihood that the user will actually perform the desired behavior. And this, it isn't limited to explicit text on buttons.
Yeah.
We're surrounded by implicit external triggers encoded into the very design of our digital environment.
Right. It's like the learned language of the internet. We don't need a sign that says click this text to go to a new page. We just know that if text is blue and underlined, it is a link. We have learned that a little square image with rounded corners on our phone screen is an app icon, and its sole purpose is to be tapped. The instruction manual is embedded directly into the visual design.
And understanding how to deploy those embedded instructions is what separates massive companies from failed startups.
Right.
But it gets more nuanced than just use a bright button. We have to break these external triggers down further into 4 distinct types.
Okay.
Each type serves a vastly different strategic purpose in the life cycle of a business.
Let's get into those 4 types, because if you are trying to build anything, a YouTube channel, an app, a newsletter, you have to understand the difference. The first type of external trigger is paid triggers.
Paid triggers are exactly what they sound like. This is advertising.
Right.
It's search engine marketing, social media ad placements, sponsored content. You are literally opening your wallet to buy the right to place a sensory stimulus in front of a potential user.
But let's look at the reality of this. If paid triggers are so effective at getting people to click a button, why not just rely on them permanently?
Right.
I mean, if I have a new software startup and I know that spending $2 on a Google ad guarantees someone will click and visit my site, why wouldn't I just keep spending that $2 every single time I want them to come back?
Because if you do that, your business model will collapse under its own weight.
Wow.
To understand why, you really have to look at the unit economics of habit-forming companies. Unit economics refers to the direct revenues and costs associated with a single user. There are 2 vital numbers: customer acquisition cost, or CAC, which is how much you spend to get the user, and lifetime value, or LTV, which is how much revenue that user generates over their entire relationship with you.
Right, so if I spend $5 on an ad to get a user, and they only ever generate $2 in value for me, I am basically losing $3 every time I succeed.
Precisely. You're bleeding money. Paid triggers are highly effective and often absolutely necessary for acquiring new users. They are the initial megaphone. But habit-forming companies cannot sustain themselves if they have to pay for re-engagement. Imagine if Facebook or Twitter had to buy an ad to remind you to check your news feed every single morning.
That would be insane.
The cost would be astronomical. They would burn through their capital in a matter of days. So habit-forming businesses generally use paid triggers only at the very beginning of the relationship. They pay to get you through the front door, but they absolutely cannot rely on paying you to stay in the living room.
Which means you have to find ways to trigger people that don't cost money every single time. That leads us directly to the second type of external triggers.
Yeah.
These are the ones you don't directly buy. It includes favorable press mentions, getting your app featured on the homepage of the Apple App Store, landing a segment on a morning news show, or, the Holy Grail, creating a viral video.
And on the surface, earned triggers seem like the perfect solution. They're essentially free distribution.
Exactly. I mean, isn't going viral the ultimate dream for anyone launching a product? You wake up one morning, your TikTok video has 10 million views, and you have thousands of new users without spending a dime on ads.
It is the dream for a massive, instantaneous spike in awareness. It feels fantastic. But it is a dangerous illusion if you mistake it for a sustainable strategy.
Really? Why?
Because the crucial question you have to ask is, what happens next Tuesday? Earned triggers are technically free in terms of ad spend, but they cost a tremendous amount of time, energy, and hustle in public relations and content creation. And the harsh reality is that the awareness generated by earned triggers is incredibly short-lived.
Yeah, the half-life of internet virality is basically 0. You are the main character of the internet for about 12 hours, and then the algorithm just, moves on to a video of a cat doing a backflip.
That is exactly the problem.
Mhm.
Earned triggers are entirely too unpredictable to drive ongoing, habitual engagement. You cannot build a predictable daily habit on the hope that a major tech blog will decide to write a glowing review about your software every single week.
Right.
You cannot engineer virality on command indefinitely. It is a fantastic way to inject a burst of momentum into a product, but as a mechanism for bringing users back day after day, it is structurally flawed.
So paid triggers bankrupt you if you use them too long, and earned triggers are too chaotic to rely on. That brings us to the third type, relationship triggers.
Yeah.
This is the realm of human-to-human connection. It is one person telling another person about a product. It's word-of-mouth recommendations, electronic invitations, or seeing that your friend liked a brand on Facebook.
And historically, this type of trigger has been responsible for some of the most explosive growth in the history of technology. The classic example is PayPal in the late 1990s. When PayPal first launched, they faced a massive hurdle. How do you get people to trust a brand new digital service with their actual bank accounts?
Right. In the late 90s, people were still terrified to put their credit card into a computer, let alone their bank account.
Exactly. So PayPal utilized relationship triggers to bypass that skepticism and achieve viral hypergrowth. They made it incredibly easy for an existing user to send money to someone who didn't even have an account yet.
I remember this era. The psychological weight of that trigger was just brilliant. You would open your inbox, and instead of a generic marketing email from a faceless company, you got a message that said, "Your friend Dave just sent you $50. Click here to claim it."
The sheer allure of that relationship trigger is undeniable. It leverages social proof and financial incentives simultaneously. You trust Dave, and you want the $50.
Yeah, you definitely want the $50.
It was a massive, highly effective external trigger that relied entirely on the relationship between two people. PayPal grew exponentially because the trigger was both highly viral, every transaction inherently invited a new user, and genuinely useful to both parties.
But, whenever we talk about relationship triggers, we have to talk about the dark side of leveraging personal connections. There is a very thin line between a brilliant relationship trigger and a predatory one.
Yes, and crossing that line introduces immense risk to a business. This is the territory of dark patterns.
Dark patterns.
Right. Dark patterns occur when product designers intentionally trick or manipulate users into taking actions they didn't mean to take, specifically regarding their personal networks. For example, tricking a user into inviting all their friends or blasting a promotional message to their entire social network without clear, informed consent.
We have all experienced this. You download a new app, and during an onboarding, it asks for access to your contacts to find friends who are already using the app.
Right.
You click Allow because you want to see who is there. And then, without warning, the app silently emails every single person in your contact list, your boss, your ex, your dentist, with a spammy link that says, "Hey, I love this new app. You should download it."
It is a devastatingly short-sighted tactic.
Yeah.
Companies might look at their analytics dashboard and see a brief, thrilling spike in growth when they deploy these dark patterns. But the hidden cost is catastrophic.
Yeah, people hate it.
It completely burns the social currency of the user. When a person realizes they have been duped into spamming their entire professional and personal network, the feeling isn't just annoyance. It is acute embarrassment and betrayal.
Absolutely.
It destroys all goodwill and trust. The user will almost certainly vent their frustration, leave a terrible review, and abandon the product entirely. A sustainable relationship trigger requires an engaged user who is actually genuinely enthusiastic about sharing the product.
Yeah.
You cannot fake or force human connection.
So we've covered the first three. Paid triggers rent attention with money. Earned triggers rent attention with PR hustle. Relationship triggers rent attention through social capital.
Right.
But if you're building a business right now, you have to look at all three of those as rentals. They are ways to get the user in the door. The ultimate goal, the promised land of external triggers, is the fourth type, and that is the owned trigger.
Owned triggers are the objective. These are the triggers that actually manage to consume a piece of physical or digital real estate in the user's everyday environment.
Okay, like what?
Think about an app icon sitting permanently on your phone's home screen. Think about an email newsletter that lands in your inbox every Tuesday morning. Think about a little red badge notifying you of an app update.
But the critical psychological distinction here, the thing that separates an owned trigger from a paid ad, is consent.
Consent is the defining factor. An owned trigger only exists in that space because the user explicitly invited it in.
Right.
They made the conscious choice to install the app on their personal device. They manually typed their email address into a subscription box. They tapped allow on a push notification prompt. As long as the user maintains that agreement, the company effectively owns a share of that user's attentional space.
Which is incredibly valuable because now you can consistently cue the user to take action without having to bid against competitors for ad space and without having to pray that an influencer mentions you. You have a direct owned line of communication.
You do. You've successfully moved them through the funnel. You rented their attention just long enough to convince them to let you own a small piece of it. But, and this is a massive but, even owned triggers are just a stepping stone. They are not the final destination, because the ultimate goal of all these external triggers, the ads, the virality, the app icons, is to propel the user through the behavior loop so many times that eventually they don't need the external prompting at all.
And this is where the entire paradigm shifts, because if we are honest, even owned triggers have an expiration date. There is a phenomenon called alert fatigue.
Right, alert fatigue.
If a company abuses their owned real estate, if they send me 4 push notifications a day or clutter my inbox with useless newsletters, I am going to revoke that consent. I will delete the app, unsubscribe from the list, and turn off the notifications.
Exactly.
The external scaffolding eventually stops working. So how do these massive platforms get us to come back automatically without ever sending an alert?
To answer that, we have to leave the tangible realm of the external trigger and enter the much more profound and somewhat invisible territory of the internal trigger.
The emotional itch.
Exactly. Internal triggers operate on a completely different frequency than external ones. You cannot see an internal trigger. You cannot touch it or hear it.
Right.
There is no bright orange button to click. There is no app icon to tap. Instead, internal triggers manifest entirely within the user's mind. They occur when a product or service becomes so deeply integrated into a user's life that it becomes tightly coupled with a specific thought, a pre-existing daily routine, or, and this is the most powerful catalyst of all, an emotion.
When I was diving into this part of the psychology, it honestly reframed how I view my own behavior. Because the research indicates that it isn't just any emotion that drives us. It is specifically negative emotions that act as the most powerful internal triggers.
Yes.
We are talking about feelings of boredom, loneliness, frustration, confusion, and indecisiveness.
It is a profound, albeit slightly cynical, realization about human nature. We are highly motivated to avoid pain. And these negative emotions, even when they are incredibly minor or fleeting, instigate a slight psychological pain.
Yeah, just a tiny bit of discomfort.
It is a subtle irritation. It's an itch. And human beings are wired to quell that negative sensation as quickly as possible. That itch prompts an almost instantaneous, often completely mindless action to find relief.
Let's bring this back to Yin, the Stanford student with the Instagram habit. We established that she snaps photos constantly, but when you dig into the psychology, she isn't doing it just for the joy of photography.
Right.
She is doing it because she feels a very specific, minor negative emotion. She fears that a special fleeting moment will be lost forever.
That is the internal trigger. And it is vital to understand that the severity of that discomfort, that tiny pang of anxiety about losing the moment, might be entirely below the perceptibility of her active consciousness.
Oh, interesting.
She doesn't stop and think, I'm currently experiencing existential dread regarding the fleeting nature of time, therefore I must open a photo application.
Right.
It happens in a fraction of a second. Our lives are densely packed with these microscopic stressors, and we are usually totally unaware of our habitual knee-jerk reactions to them.
And this isn't just philosophical speculation. There is incredibly compelling real-world data to back up this connection between negative emotions and technology use. There was a fascinating study conducted in 2011 at the Missouri University of Science and Technology.
Oh, that's a great study.
Yeah. Researchers wanted to understand internet behavior, so they tracked the usage of 216 undergraduate students over the course of an entire academic year. It was completely anonymous tracking. They were just looking at the raw data of how frequently these students used the web, what categories of sites they visited, and how much time they spent on them.
On its own, that is just basic behavioral data.
Yeah.
But what makes this study a landmark piece of research is the secondary data set they introduced at the end of the year.
Right.
The researchers took all that anonymized internet usage data and cross-referenced it against medical data from the university's health services. Specifically, they looked at students who had visited the clinic and exhibited symptoms of depression.
And the results were stark. They weren't just subtle trends, they were glaring correlations. The researchers found that participants who suffered from depressive symptoms engaged in vastly different internet behavior than the baseline.
Yes.
They showed significantly higher email usage, they consumed vastly increased amounts of video content, and they spent far more time gaming.
If we step back and analyze the psychological implications of that data, the hypothesis is incredibly striking. People suffering from clinical depression, by definition, experience negative emotions more frequently and more intensely than the general population.
Right.
They feel deeper apathy, loneliness, and sadness. And what does the data show they do when they feel those negative emotions? They seek immediate relief. They turn to technology to lift their mood, to distract their mind, or to feel a simulated sense of connection. They use the internet as a painkiller.
A painkiller, that word changes everything. In business schools, there is this classic debate investors use to evaluate startups. Are you selling a vitamin or a painkiller?
Oh yeah, the classic question.
The idea is that vitamins are nice to have. You take a vitamin because you want to be healthier in the long term, but if you forget to take it for a week, you don't really notice. It doesn't hurt.
Right.
But a painkiller, if you have a blinding migraine, you will drop everything, get in your car, and drive to the pharmacy at midnight. A painkiller is a must-have.
And the revelation here is that truly habit-forming products are fundamentally emotional painkillers.
Yeah.
If you are designing a product, you cannot just brainstorm a list of cool, innovative features and hope people use them.
No.
You must identify a specific emotional itch your target user experiences throughout their day, and you must position your product as the fastest, most reliable salve for that itch.
Okay, let's play this out with some of the biggest tech giants in the world just to see how universal this concept is. Let's look at Pinterest. What is the underlying emotional itch that drives someone to open Pinterest?
Think about the state of mind of a typical Pinterest user right before they open the app. Often, they are feeling overly stressed, disorganized, or overwhelmed by options, whether they are planning a wedding, a home renovation, or just trying to figure out dinner.
Yeah, that makes sense.
They seek calm and order. Pinterest provides a visually soothing, highly organized environment where they can curate and control their digital space. It reliably relieves the itch of overwhelm and stress.
I can totally see that. What about social networks like Facebook or Twitter?
The primary driver there is loneliness or isolation. You have a few minutes of downtime, maybe you're waiting in line at the grocery store, and you feel a tiny pang of disconnection.
Right.
You open Facebook, and you are instantly provided with a frictionless illusion of social connection. You see faces, you see updates, you feel involved. It numbs the isolation.
And does the same emotional logic apply to something purely utilitarian like Google? Google isn't a social network, it's a search bar.
Absolutely. The negative emotion driving Google usage is uncertainty. Human beings hate feeling ignorant or unsure.
Oh yeah, we definitely do.
When you are in a debate with a friend about what year a movie came out, or you don't know how to fix a leaky faucet, that lack of knowledge creates a tiny, uncomfortable sensation of uncertainty. To ameliorate that feeling, Google is just a few keystrokes away. It provides instant certainty.
Wow.
And the brilliant part is, in all these cases, Pinterest, Facebook, Google, the user does not need an external notification to prompt the action. The feeling itself, the stress, the loneliness, the uncertainty precipitates the behavior. The information about what to do next isn't written on a billboard. It is encoded as a deeply learned association in the user's own memory.
The negative emotion is the notification. That is wild to think about. But realizing this leads to a massive, practical roadblock for anyone trying to build a business.
Okay, what's that?
If I am an entrepreneur and I know I need to map my software to my user's emotional pain, how do I actually figure out what that pain is? I can't exactly walk up to a potential customer in a coffee shop, tap them on the shoulder, and ask, "Excuse me, what deep-seated emotional trauma are you trying to escape by scrolling on your phone right now?"
Yeah. No, you definitely can't do that.
They would look at me like I'm insane. People don't think in those terms. They don't conceptualize their own behavior as emotional escapism. So how on earth do you uncover that root emotion?
You've hit on one of the hardest challenges in product design. You cannot rely on surface-level answers. In behavioral economics, there is a crucial distinction between a person's declared preferences, what they explicitly say they want or do, and their revealed preferences, what their actual behavior proves they want.
Right.
If you hand a user a generic survey and ask why they use your app, they will give you a logical, functional answer. They will say, I use it to save time. They won't say, I use it to avoid feeling lonely. Uncovering the truth requires digging much deeper into the psyche of the consumer.
And there is a really practical strategy for doing this, popularized by Jack Dorsey, the co-founder of Twitter and Square. He uses a technique to force his teams to build genuine empathy.
Yes, Dorsey is a massive proponent of what he calls user narratives.
Hmm.
He argues that if you want to build a product that genuinely resonates, you cannot just look at spreadsheets of user data.
You need a story.
You have to put yourself inside the user's physical and emotional reality. You have to write a story from their perspective, and you should read almost like a stage play or a screenplay script.
Oh, that's interesting.
He gives the example of writing a narrative about a specific user standing in the middle of a busy street in Chicago, walking into a crowded coffee shop. You write out the exact context, the noise of the street, the temperature, the rush therein, and the specific emotional state of that exact moment. By forcing yourself to build that level of deep narrative empathy, the actual product priorities, what features are necessary and what features are useless, naturally reveal themselves.
But even if you write a brilliant descriptive narrative, you still have to drill down through the layers to find the core emotional trigger. And to do that, there is an amazing framework borrowed from an entirely different industry, manufacturing. Specifically, Taiichi Ohno's 5 Whys method, which he developed for the Toyota production system.
It is a phenomenal, albeit relentless, diagnostic tool. Ohno discovered that when a machine breaks down on an assembly line, the immediate, obvious answer is rarely the true cause.
Right.
By simply repeating the question why 5 times, you strip away the superficial symptoms and expose the true nature of the problem. It forces you to stop accepting surface-level functional answers and drill down to the bedrock root cause. And when we apply this to designing habit-forming products, that root cause is almost always an emotional vulnerability.
I think we need to actually role-play this so you can hear exactly how this digging process sounds in practice. Let's use a scenario.
Okay, let's do it.
Imagine we're back in time, and we are trying to invent a fancy new workplace technology called electronic mail, or email, for the very first time. Our target persona is a busy middle manager named Julie. I will play the role of the product designer who has done some initial research on Julie, and you play the relentless interrogator, pushing me with the whys.
Sounds good. So you have observed your target user, Julie. Let's start at the surface level. Why? Number one, why would Julie want to use this new email invention?
While looking at her workflow, functionally, she needs a way to send and receive messages from her computer.
Okay, but let's go deeper. Why number two? Why does she need to send and receive messages from her computer?
Because it's faster than making a phone call or walking across the office. She wants to share and receive information quickly.
We are still talking about utility. Let's push further. Why number three? Why does she feel the need to share and receive information so quickly?
Let me think about her environment. I guess she needs to know exactly what is going on in the projects her coworkers are handling and what her boss is thinking about.
Getting closer to the human element. Why number four? Why does she need to know exactly what is going on with her coworkers and her boss?
Because she manages a team, and she needs to know if a crisis is happening or if someone specifically needs her input to move forward.
And finally, why number five? Emotionally, deep down, why does she care so much about knowing if someone needs her?
Because if she doesn't know what's going on, she loses control. She, fears being out of the loop. She's terrified of becoming irrelevant.
Wow.
Okay.
Look at the trajectory of that conversation. Look at where we started and where we ended up. We started with sending and receiving messages, which is a purely functional mechanical utility.
Right.
If you only design for that, you build a sterile, boring inbox. But by forcing ourselves to ask why 5 times, we drilled past the utility and arrived at the fear of being out of the loop. A raw, powerful, highly motivating human emotion.
That transition from utility to emotion is everything. If you are building a product, you cannot stop at the functional level. Force yourself to ask why until you uncover the fear, the desire, or the anxiety that is actually driving the human being on the other side of the screen.
Exactly.
Because once we know that Julie is driven by the fear of being out of the loop, it changes how we design the product. We don't just design a way to send text. We design notifications. We design CC and BCC functions. We design read receipts, all tools to calm that specific fear of missing information.
Exactly. That accurate, empathetic understanding of the underlying emotional need informs every single product requirement down to the color of the buttons. If you misdiagnose the emotion, you will inevitably build the wrong product no matter how good your coding is.
So we have explored the entire landscape. We started with external triggers, the bright buttons and notifications that grab our attention, and we've dug deep into internal triggers, the emotional aches and fears that drive us from the inside. Now, I want to map this entire life cycle out. Let's bring all these pieces together and return to our opening story, Yin, and her relentless Instagram habit. How does this theoretical framework actually explain her daily routine?
Let's trace her journey chronologically, because it illustrates the perfect handoff from external to internal. Every habit-forming product must start in the external phase.
Right. The oyster needs the grit.
Exactly. Before Yin ever opened Instagram for the first time, she was likely prompted by a relationship trigger. A friend sitting across from her at a coffee shop probably said, "Hey, you have to download this new photo app. Everyone is on it."
Right, that's the initial spark. And maybe she hesitated, but then she saw some earned triggers to validate it. She read a tech blog reviewing the app, or she opened the Apple App Store and saw it featured prominently on the homepage.
Those external triggers, the friend's recommendation and the media validation, reduced her friction and prompted her to take the crucial action installing the app.
Okay, so now it's on her phone.
Yes, and once she installed it, Instagram immediately transitioned her to own triggers. The app icon was now permanently stationed on her phone's home screen. She started receiving push notifications telling her that a friend just posted a new photo. At this point, Instagram owned a valuable piece of her attentional real estate.
The scaffolding is up. She is being guided by the app. But the magic, the true formation of the habit, happens next, over weeks of repetitious use. Seeing a notification, opening the app, looking at a photo, feeling a tiny burst of pleasure. A psychological shift occurred.
Yes.
The external pumps, the buzzes in her pocket started to fade away as the primary driver of her behavior.
They faded because the internal phase took over. Yin started taking photos and opening the app not because her phone told her to, but because she felt a specific emotional cue. She would see a beautiful sunset or a funny moment with a friend, and she would feel that tiny pang of anxiety, the fear of losing a special moment, the anxiety of digital permanence. That pang of stress became her internal trigger. And because of her repeated use, her brain had formed a hardwired association. Instagram is the fastest, most reliable way to alleviate that specific fear.
It provides the psychological relief of externalizing your memory onto a server. You don't have to worry about forgetting the sunset because Instagram is holding it for you. And the brilliance of these platforms is that they don't just solve one emotional problem. There are secondary internal triggers at play too.
Absolutely. A product like Instagram is multifaceted. It is a camera, but it is also a massive social network. So when Yin is sitting in a waiting room and feels a wave of boredom, Instagram is there to cure that boredom through endless scrolling and visual novelty. When she feels a bit disconnected, it provides social connection and lighthearted banter in the comments. And perhaps most powerfully, it constantly alleviates FOMO, the fear of missing out, by keeping her perpetually updated on the lives of her peers.
She is completely enveloped. So if we look at the grand architecture of the trigger life cycle, the blueprint is clear. You build a habit by using loud, clear external triggers, the ads, the emails, the push notifications, to aggressively guide the user through the actions until they naturally subconsciously associate your product with their own internal emotional cues.
It is exactly like building a bridge. The external triggers are the temporary scaffolding used to construct the habit. You need them to hold the structure up initially.
Right.
But once the bridge to the internal emotional trigger is solidly built, once the mental association is formed, the scaffolding falls away. The external alerts become secondary. The user's own internal emotional landscape does the work for you.
I think that is the perfect place to tie all of this together. If we distill the soul of this entire exploration on triggers, what are we left with? To me, it is a profoundly illuminating and maybe slightly uncomfortable realization about why we do what we do. We are largely automatically driven by a relentless desire to escape tiny, daily emotional discomforts. The itch.
It is the unifying theory of digital behavior. A truly successful, world-changing, habit-forming business does not just sell a clever feature or a faster widget or a prettier interface.
No, it doesn't.
It identifies a user's quiet emotional pain, and it manufactures a reliable, predictable, instantaneous response to alleviate that pain. The magic trick of product design is figuring out how to successfully pass the baton from a loud, demanding external call to action, like a bright orange button in an email, to a quiet, undeniable internal urge within the user's own mind.
It is the transition from a company telling you, log in now, to you silently feeling, I am lonely, I need to open this app. That is the moment a product becomes indispensable.
It is the holy grail. But here is the critical catch, and this is exactly what we have to look forward to unpacking next.
Oh, I'm ready.
Let's assume you have successfully triggered your user. Let's say you hit them with the perfect notification, or they feel that exact emotional itch you designed for. How do you guarantee they will actually do what you want them to do?
Right.
Because knowing that you should do something and actually having the physical ability and the psychological motivation to follow through are two entirely different things. Bridging that gap comes down to the deep science of human motivation, which is exactly what we will dissect in the next phase action.
Oh, the psychology of motivation is going to be incredible to dive into. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to ponder as you go about the rest of your day. The next time you put down your device or close your laptop or turn off your car engine, take 1 second to ask yourself, what was the real underlying emotional itch you were trying to scratch by listening to this deep dive?
Was it a desire for intellectual mastery? Was it a fear of falling behind the curve in your industry? Or were you simply looking for a way to alleviate boredom during your commute?
Whatever the raw emotion was, the trigger worked. You're here. We'll see you next time.
What you just listened was the beginning of a full audio, way longer, explaining every single chapter of the book. If you would like to keep listening to the end and access to the full audio, you can access it with the link down below in the description and in the pinned comment.